DJ Shadow is a producer who should need no introduction. He's one of the industry's most honest, humble, and successful DJs, but like his name sort of alludes to, he's managed to keep a fairly low profile while consistently remaining on the cutting edge of instrumental hip-hop for over 30 years. He's dedicated to the spirit of the OGs, that fusion of Grandmaster Flash that enables his sound to obliterate genre boundaries and allows his music to inspire contemporaries for decades after its release. Born in 1972 in the Bay Area, Joshua Davis, aka DJ Shadow, got his start by sending in mixtapes that he'd made with a 4-track recorder to the local college radio station. He'd get a job there, become a disc jockey, and really start to develop that experimental and adamantly different style of his. His remixes would be released through a couple of short-lived underground hip-hop labels throughout the early 90s, and eventually he'd get in contact with James Lavelle of Low Wax over in London. Through that label, he would release several singles, as well as his critically acclaimed, trailblazing debut studio album, Introducing, in September of 1996. That record actually holds a Guinness record for the first ever completely sampled album, and it's a true masterclass in analog sampling. The entrancing combinations pulled off with such simple technology and such tremendous array of samples is mind-boggling. The effort and the precision required to pull this project off is astounding, and honestly I could probably spend all day here singing its praises, but enough people have already done that. Following it up with a compilation of the singles he'd released through Mo Wax, he'd joined forces with the aforementioned James Lavelle, create the group Uncle, and produce their debut album Science Fiction in 1998. He then went on to produce a score for a award-winning documentary called Dark Days in 2000, and even starred in the movie Scratch in 2001. DJ Shadow has never explicitly been an album-oriented artist, so his catalog may seem a little sparse for someone who's been around for over 30 years. That said, he is quite obviously creatively active between those periods, and when he does come out with an album, it's something new, different, and it has something to say. I can appreciate someone who takes 3 to 6 years between projects to really flesh out new ideas and have, honestly, new technologies to work with. So it wouldn't be until June of 2002, after touring, getting married, and a few of those technological advances, that audiences would finally get to hear his sophomore LP. This is that next step in the ever-evolving, subversive career of DJ Shadow through MCA Records. This is The Private Press. Once again, he sets out and achieves something completely new nobody else was doing. Using the most obscure samples and sonic experiments, DJ Shadow pieces together such a wide array of instrumentals, crafting fresh narratives out of long-forgotten wax. Its multi-layered, meandering track list manages to connect emotions like melancholy with wonder. It's a pretty surreal listening experience that can range from bangers to ballads, all the way to some of the most interestingly textured and undefinable musical landscapes. The working title for this was actually Non-Linear, and you can see that as a bit of a theme that reoccurs across the tracks here. That's not to say that this album jumps around sporadically or is too much to stomach, but there are some cases where it seems to almost intentionally go out of its way to disrupt its own flow. So while the concept itself is super interesting, it can create a bit of a challenge for an album listener. For that reason, it might be one of DJ Shadow's least accessible albums, but it still retains his unique musical stamp and maintains the timeless quality that each of his ventures achieves. The more I delve into it, the more I discover, with every song presenting an interesting alternative approach and outlook to sampling, hip-hop instrumentals, and music in general. I'm curious to know your thoughts on DJ Shadow and The Private Press, and I'm excited to try my best to carve my way through this track list to see if I don't get lost along the way. And even before taking my first swing at it, Shadow has forced me to explain the origins of the samples he uses to open and close this project. It's something called a recordio disc. It plays right into this album's namesake, these old 78s from the 40s, 50s, and 60s that are personalized recordings that people used to send to each other in lieu of a letter. Basically a fancy auditory postcard, and regardless of if you actually like what he's created here, you have to admit that sampling something like that is the mark of a truly creative mind. That opener is called Letter from Home, and it's just such a unique introduction to this CD. It's then followed by a deep, droning, infectious groove on the track Fixed Income, feeling like a hot trek through a desert, but this track is actually kind of like a mirage that tricks you into thinking that this album has already started. I say that because he's really playing into the non-linear theme right here, with the third song being Une autre introduction, another introduction with some of that standard DJ flair that you get and some samples that are welcoming you to the show. It then charges into this hip-hop backbeat and this scratchy, catchy banger called Walkie Talkie that goes so hard that it kind of overhypes this project. The energy shifts into a completely different direction on Giving Up the Ghost with the much softer, almost ambient rock cut here. It's really full, densely layered, that builds in intensity as it goes, but as interesting and emotive as that layering is, it just kind of fades off as it fades away, and you're not left with a whole lot to remember. It's really rich, but not all that sticky, if you know what I mean. The single 6 Days is possibly this album's most gripping tale, with vocal samples taken from the Colonel Bagshot song 6 Days War, as well as some taken from the Dennis Oliveri song I Cry in the Morning. Shadow crafts a completely new instrumental that gives these lyrics some newfound depth and meaning, really pulling at the heartstrings with this tale of war and maybe procrastination, and maybe just kind of reflecting on a week in the life and just how tomorrow never comes until it's too late. Check this one out, or check out the hip-hop style remix featuring Mos Def that is an excellent track as well. The next two tracks are linked both musically and through their names. You've got first Mongrel ... then Meets His Maker following it up. You're introduced to the instrumental with the Mongrel track, and then it takes a brief pause, starts back up, and really evolves, changes, and tells an interesting story that is kind of up to your own imagination of what it's about. I think a visual component would really help me contextualize it a bit better, but honestly, I'm pretty sure that imagination is what this DJ prefers me to use. Thinking about his non-linear mantra can kind of help reveal why some of these tracks end up so ambiguously like they are, and it ultimately is probably one of the things that gives it such a re-listenable quality. Those two songs with one name are followed up by one song with two names. This one's called Right Thing / GDSM SOB, and if I could be honest, this Right Thing half of this song could be left out, in my opinion. It's awkward, obnoxious, a little bit reminiscent of Classified song Beatin' It, where he goes through and builds a beat kind of live, but honestly, once you get past that vocal sample, the song improves a lot. It's glitchy, super drum loaded, and it's got a lot of energy, so I think cutting off that Right Thing half does wonders for this song, and the remixes of it show that. Monosyllabic is another favorite of mine, this project's most distorted EDM number. It's so futuristic and so different than anything else that was being produced at the time. We then get another pair of similarly named songs, with Mashin' on the Motorway being followed by Blood on the Motorway, the first of those obviously being the cause of the second, but beyond their titles, they're very musically dissimilar, with Mashin' being this high-speed dash weaving in and out of traffic. It's terribly fun while it's happening, and it reminds me a lot of the closing track off the
very first album I reviewed on this channel. The track being Dirty Afro. It also ends in a bloody explosion, but in this case you actually get left with Blood on the Motorway, giving you a sort of blissful electronic eternity to kind of float in for a nice while. It really is quite the concept, with it even restarting about 3.5 minutes in. You feel like you come to the end of the song and then, oh, it's just, you're back at the beginning right there. The vocal sample really perfectly complements Shadow's instrumental here on this 9-minute epic mix. One more track before we get another Recordio, Letter from Home, that ends this LP. This one at least sort of continues the narrative with its title from that motorway crash. It's You Can't Go Home Again, but in this case you don't get that peaceful eternity you're left with Blood on the Motorway. This time you get a much more purgatorial, frenzied number. It's reflected in the music video for this track, and it does quite well to bump this fantastically subversive CD to conclusion. The Private Press is a challenging listen, but it certainly is rewarding, and I love the fact that every time I listen to it, I'm always picking up on something that I missed the first dozen or so times I've tried it. Even now, just thinking about and talking about the track list has led me to discover that it sort of is a mirror of itself. When you hit that mongrel ... point, and then you get Meets His Maker that follows it up, kind of in the exact same lane, but then heading off in a different direction, but the energy and kind of the wave that you ride is sort of similar. I couldn't obviously take the same path I got to get there. I was hacking and slashing to get to the finish line, but it sure is an interesting project that I'm going to continue to be learning from. But for that reason, I kind of recommend trying out some of his other less challenging projects first before diving headfirst into this mashup masterclass. If you can't tell, I am absolutely enamored by DJ Shadow. I love his attitude. I am amazed by his ability to come up with new ideas that consistently evolve and elevate the world of DJing, hip-hop, and all the music he surrounds himself with. He's so inspiring to me to continue to dig around looking for experimental albums that I can get my ears around and just continue to diversify my collection. I certainly believe it's worth paying attention to anything DJ Shadow puts his creative stamp on. Even the artists he chooses to collaborate with are worth a try. But for now, you gotta try out all these other albums he's put out. Especially don't miss out on his latest, the 2019 Our Pathetic Age. It's poignant. He is a timeless legend. I want you to check it out. It's linked right in the description along with all the other music I've talked about today, samples, whatnot. Check it out, or leave me a comment, let me know your thoughts on DJ Shadow, The Private Press. Have you ever seen one of his live shows? He's just jumped up my list of artists I want to see live after getting into him here and checking out a few of his shows online. I'd like you to like it, but without the dislikes, it doesn't really matter, so the best thing you can do is subscribe, share it with a friend, and check out some more videos I've made over here. Thanks a million for watching. Take good care. I'll see you next time, guys.